Who do you see on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader.
Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet. I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Even the country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid. Language is fluid. Yes, and Latino voters are fluid.
Bill Maher has been especially blunt lately, zeroing in on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with an intensity that is hard to ignore across multiple episodes of Real Time. He delivers sharp, unfiltered criticism that not only targets her messaging, but also questions the broader direction of the progressive movement she represents. It feels less like routine commentary and more like a direct ideological clash. And from that tension, a bigger question keeps emerging. What does wokeness actually mean? And where does it begin to cross the line?
James Carville knew how to win, and he blamed the Democratic losses this November 2nd on stupid wokeness. To which AOC fired back that wokeness is a term almost exclusively used by older people these days. So that should tell you all you need to know. What? This is a term folks like you brought out very recently and had been proudly displaying at every march since. Just last year, The Guardian declared woke the word of our era. I guess they didn't get the memo from the Mean Girls Club.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has long been linked to progressive politics, often described by critics as woke. And over time, that association has fueled a growing debate about how closely she connects with everyday concerns. Some argue that what once energized her supporters is now creating distance from average voters. While she once leaned into that identity with confidence at rallies and public appearances, shifting public attitudes have made the label far more controversial than it used to be. And as criticism grows, there are signs she may be adjusting her message and tone. But Bill Maher is not letting that shift pass quietly. As on Real Time with Bill Maher, he calls out what he sees as a subtle rebrand, highlighting the contrast between her past rhetoric and her current positioning in a way that feels blunt, direct, and difficult to ignore.
What a great strategy, never missing an opportunity to remind voters how lame and clueless and hopelessly uncool they are, especially since those are the ones who actually vote. But okay, fine. What word would you like us to use for the plainly insane excesses of the left that are not liberalism, but something completely different? Because you can't have that word liberal from us and think it should cover things like canceling Lincoln and teaching third graders they're oppressors. That's all your new thing.
This is exactly why so many people gravitate toward Bill Maher. He does not filter his delivery or soften his opinions to avoid backlash. Instead, he leans into discomfort and says what others hold back. And that blunt style is what keeps his audience engaged as the conversation around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez continues to shift, because if she is stepping away from the woke label, it raises a bigger question about the ideas tied to it and whether a rebrand actually changes anything. Critics argue that debates around gender identity, youth decision-making, and fairness in sports are still active and unresolved, and for them, changing the language does not remove the concerns. It only reshapes how they are framed, and that is the core of Maher's argument that a movement can be renamed, but the underlying tensions remain, and people are unlikely to simply move on quietly, which pushes the conversation into the next flashpoint in this ongoing cultural debate.
Every month I see a new poll reporting how much Latinos despise the woke term Latinx. It's about as popular with them as a reboot of Speedy Gonzales. Even the country's oldest Latino civil rights group came out against it, yet AOC keeps defending it, saying gender is fluid, language is fluid.
It is hard to ignore how strongly figures like Gavin Newsom and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez once promoted the term Latinx, presenting it as a more modern and inclusive way to describe the Latino community. But from the beginning, the reaction on the ground told a different story, as many people within that same community either did not recognize the term or openly rejected it. And despite that disconnect, the push continued, which fueled the perception that cultural language was being shaped from the top down rather than by the people it was meant to represent. And when the backlash became too loud to ignore, Newsom appeared to step away from the term, while Ocasio-Cortez defended it by arguing that language evolves naturally, yet for many voters that explanation did not resonate, and instead reinforced a growing sense that leaders were out of sync with everyday perspectives. And moments like this did not just create disagreement. They gradually eroded trust, and that erosion carried over into how people responded when it came time to vote.
And more of them now than ever are identifying as Republican. So are Asian Americans, whose support for Democrats is down 16 points since the last election. A lot of that is because, in the name of achieving equity in schools, Democrats in deep blue cities have made it a mission to eliminate the advanced programs at which Asian kids excel. Asian parents said, okay, I wish all kids well, not a racist, but I need someone who acts like my lawyer. If you're a parent and wanted schools to reopen a lot sooner than they did after COVID shutdowns, or think maybe your kid is getting a bad education, partly because it's nearly impossible to fire a lousy teacher, yeah, you're going to say, congratulations, teachers, you got yourself a good lawyer. The Democratic Party's always got your back, 100%. But I've noticed my kid is kind of an idiot.
At the heart of it, Bill Maher is making a point that goes beyond a single debate, arguing that figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are not just losing arguments on television, but potentially losing support from voters who once strongly backed them, including many within Asian and Latino communities who feel overlooked rather than represented. And from this perspective, the shift is less about complex ideology and more about frustration among people who feel talked down to instead of genuinely heard, as they grow tired of symbolic gestures and high-level rhetoric that does not translate into meaningful improvements in daily life. Because for many voters, the priorities remain practical, better schools, safer neighborhoods, and an economy that rewards effort. And when those concerns take a backseat to cultural debates, it creates a disconnect that becomes difficult to ignore. And Maher's central message is direct that when politicians focus more on trends than tangible outcomes, they risk losing credibility. And once trust fades, voters do not wait for change. They turn to whoever they believe is actually listening.
Who do you see on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader. Okay? But this is the thing the Republican Party has to understand, too. Both parties lost in the last election. Trump won, okay? And I don't know if that's going to transfer.
It is not entirely clear what Kevin McCarthy was getting at in full, but the underlying message comes through as figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders continue to command attention within parts of the Democratic base because while they can draw large, energized crowds and generate strong momentum at rallies, that visible enthusiasm does not always translate into votes when it matters most. Recent elections have highlighted the gap between excitement and turnout, where packed events, major endorsements, and heavy media coverage can create a sense of inevitability. Yet when voters actually cast ballots, the outcome depends on something broader than energy alone. As winning requires reaching beyond core supporters, connecting with everyday concerns and offering policies that resonate across different groups, and without that wider appeal, even the strongest momentum can fall short when it is ultimately tested on Election Day.
Adjacent, and then Vance and Jr. will fight it out for that crowd.
AOC and Bernie, and who's at the top of the ticket?
They're going to lead right now.
Who's at the top of that ticket, Kevin? Because if it's not Bernie, he's going to be vice president and wait his turn?
No, it would be. Bernie's been running each time. I'm just saying who's in the lead right now. I don't think that's how it ends up.
But big crowds don't necessarily mean who's the right candidate. You know, when I started...
No, but it drives where the ideas are going to go. It's going to drive the money for a while.
It doesn't make it in the winner.
It doesn't make it in the winner. You'll have to wait till you'll get 2 years out. And then you'll start seeing these governors that start showing solutions. You also have to know, what is the issue going to be? Are we going to have a foreign policy issue? Are we going to have an economic issue? And who's been the best in leading in that? But right now for the Democrats, who's going to lead for the next 2 years? The money is going to... AOC outraised everybody in the House.
And it's all small.
And this is a criticism that keeps resurfacing in discussions about modern Democratic campaigns, as the focus often drifts toward money and momentum, rather than message and connection. And while fundraising totals can appear impressive, They do not always translate into real support at the ballot box, as seen with Kamala Harris, whose campaign surge brought in significant funding and media attention, creating a sense of powerful momentum. Yet when it came time to vote, that financial edge did not guarantee success, pointing to a deeper reality that money can amplify a campaign, but it cannot repair a message that fails to resonate with voters. Because in the end, people are not simply reacting to ads or headlines. They are looking for authenticity, clarity, and policies that directly affect their everyday lives, and when the connection is missing, even the most well-funded campaigns can lose ground at the moment it matters most.
Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet. I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want.
Bill Maher is pointing to a distinction that many voters say gets blurred, which is the difference between mainstream Democrats and democratic socialists, leading some to group figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zohran Mamdani into the same category, even though their alignment is more closely associated with democratic socialism than traditional centrist democratic politics. And that difference matters when it comes to policy direction, because democratic socialism generally supports a larger government role in areas such as economic planning and social welfare. Critics argue that this gap shapes the kinds of proposals these politicians back in ways that may not always reflect the preferences of a broader electorate. And this is where Maher's warning comes into focus, as he suggests that if those ideas come to define the top of the Democratic ticket, it could make it harder to appeal to moderate and swing voters who often play a decisive role in determining election outcomes.
DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that? This just seems like more extremism at a time when Americans are begging both parties, please, could just one of you act normal?
Bill Maher presents a straightforward argument that he sees limited national viability for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if she continues to closely align with strongly progressive or democratic socialist ideas, because in his view, those positions may strongly motivate a loyal base, but can also create challenges in winning over moderate and swing voters who are often decisive in general elections. And at the center of this discussion is the broader tension between ideological commitment and electoral practicality, where policies associated with expanded government programs, such as wider public benefits or early childhood support for undocumented immigrants, are frequently cited by critics as examples that raise concerns among centrist voters. And similarly, local proposals linked to figures like Zohran Mamdani, such as expanded public transit initiatives, are also brought into the debate as part of a wider conversation about how these ideas are perceived politically. And Maher's overall point is that regardless of intent, perception plays a major role in politics, and the way voters interpret these policies often becomes a key factor in whether a candidate can build the broad coalition needed to win on Election Day.
Police or military in the streets, either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods.
When you zoom out, the core argument from Bill Maher becomes straightforward. He suggests elections are not decided by ideology alone, but by trust perception and how strongly a candidate connects with everyday voters. And while figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can generate strong enthusiasm within a loyal base, that level of energy does not always translate into broad national support, as more voters become skeptical of messaging that feels distant from their daily reality, and instead gravitate toward candidates who emphasize stability, practical solutions, and tangible results. And the larger point he highlights is that no amount of money, momentum, or media attention can fully replace broad appeal. And if a party fails to balance that, it risks repeating the same strategic mistakes while missing warning signs that matter most at the ballot box where it ultimately counts. And that is the real debate happening right now. And it is far from over. This is Debate Storm. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your opinion is part of this conversation. Stay sharp, stay questioning, and see you in the next one.